Hey guys, do you ever get to January and you're like, life is going to be different now? It's January. It just has to be. It has to look different. And I think maybe a lot of us are feeling that just because the last 2 years have sort of felt kind of the same. And, we're ready for change. I think all of us are. So that's what we talked about today. We talked about some of our word of the year, why we choose January is the time to do that. How to move through some disagreements because sometimes Sonia and I don't always see eye to eye. We're not always on the same page, surprise, surprise. And so we talked about some of the uncomfortable things that we have done to get out of that space.
Yeah, and just about dreaming. We talked about hope for this year and how we can shift our lens so that we can start inviting in all the different things that we do want for ourselves so we don't get lost in the stories and the stuckness and just like the stickiness of the world right now so that we can really start manifesting the life that we deserve.
Beautiful. And one of Sonia's sticky points is her, I would say not willingness, but it's her learning, it's her lesson to receive. And so she has some tips on how to receive. Yeah. And it's beautiful.
So enjoy.
Enjoy. Hey everybody, it's another year. It's 2022. We're in January and we're excited about the year ahead because lots of fun things happening in our lives and other people's lives.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And we always start the year with a word. But before we get into that, how's everything going? You had a fun day today, didn't you?
Did have a fun day. I had a big interview with someone today. Looking forward to sharing that with everybody. So it's already feeling like it's an exciting year.
Yeah. Why is that?
Well, it just feels like there's more potential this year. I feel like we've been stuck for the last 2 years, or I personally have been feeling very stuck in different ways, but I don't know. I just feel like the energy is suddenly shifting in the right direction.
Would you say it's unleashing?
Possibly. Maybe because a woman got unleashed. Yeah.
Yeah. So for those of you who know and maybe don't know, Sonia released her book on December 4th, 7th. And it's been getting into the hands of different people. And it's interesting because Sonia is not someone who typically, she's learning how to improve her ability to receive. And so she's been getting lots of, love and amazing support from different people from different places in the world. And it's so nice to see Sonia actually just have to read it, have to see it. Tell us what that's like for you, because this is, I mean, all of it's a new experience for you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's been quite the ride. And I know I've shared a bit of it on here and also just on social media with my vulnerability hangover that I had even over the Christmas holidays. And I still feel elements of that showing up. And just knowing that my words are out there and people are receiving them and really taking them to heart and receiving something that they need. And then they're sharing that back with me. I just noticing that I'm deflecting a lot. So somebody says something great about the work and I'm just deflecting instead of really taking that in and acknowledging that, yes, I put effort into this project and it's been so important to me to share these words, and now they're just out in the world.
So, I mean, you're not alone. I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of people listening that feel like maybe they're not always open to receiving. And maybe that's because we never really liked receiving constructive criticism as a kid, or maybe we just never really got a lot of positive reinforcement. But why don't you talk a little bit about that, because that's been a part of your journey, and it's not a bad thing. It's just a thing, right?
Yeah, I think there's different reasons for it. I think modesty and humility is celebrated. So when we want to celebrate something that we are proud of, we often will get labeled as being someone that has a big ego or is full of themselves and all these negative things that we may judge another on, and then we judge ourselves. And so when we've been taught from a young age that it's really important that you are humble, and which I do think humility is really important, but I think also part of humility is receiving. And I actually heard Jay Shetty talk about something where he was taught when he was in his monk training that when somebody gives you a compliment or wishes you well, you receive that, but then in that instant you can think about somebody else in your life that contributed to that attribute that you have or that work that you did. So then you're receiving it, and then you're also giving some back as well. So I'm going to try to practice that more, because I do feel like that's what's going to get me on that path to really start receiving it and really, really feeling what people are offering. And I think that's going to change what I then manifest for the new year.
I love that part. I think we listened to that in a podcast,
Mm-hmm.
and I love that he said that, because especially for someone who isn't really, welcoming a whole lot of receiving into their lives, and receiving can show up in many different ways. Like, it's
Mm-hmm.
not just gifts or compliments, but it could be like receiving health. It could be receiving, giving yourself time, like the gift of time, of like receiving self-care. It can look in so many
Mm-hmm.
different ways, but it's so interesting to tag someone else in that experience and
Mm-hmm.
go like, well, the reason I got here into this experience of receiving is a result of, a teaching, or maybe you're observing your kids and seeing how they're sharing with one another. Or, I mean, it can be so many different things, but it's so interesting to see, sort of carry that energy forward or backwards in time,
Mm-hmm.
and really appreciate maybe some of the lessons in that moment. And yeah, I'm so glad you brought that up. Like
Mm-hmm.
that's such a good practice for people.
Another thing I think that happens is we don't often reflect on what we've done and what we've accomplished, and we just kind of move on to the next thing, especially with like the new year, new you, and bringing your goals into the picture and wanting to manifest the things that you want for the next year. We're kind of future projecting all the time, and then we don't take that time to really reflect and understand the gifts that we received from what we've already done. And I do think receiving is a part of that, because you can go back and recognize what we've done and what we've accomplished, what we maybe didn't finish and what needs to shift, and then really receive from that space so that then we can move forward. But I think as a culture, we're always just wanting to go forward, 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 and not really pausing to reflect on that.
Yeah, and I think it's definitely culturally ingrained. Like, there's this, I mean, Sonya had this early in our business too, when we would, make steps forward and get through different accomplishments, and it was never enough. Like,
Mm-hmm.
and like the celebration of the moment was like, oh, well, isn't this amazing? And then it's like, well, it's not good enough. And we caught ourselves many times, even saying, if this was a year ago or 2 years ago and these were the results that we were getting, we would feel, you would think that you would feel pretty excited about it. But the funny reality is that it was like we were just kept thinking about what was next, what else
Yeah.
is there. And to your point of like sort of future projecting.
Yeah, and it's the programming too, that nothing's ever enough, that there's always something more to reach for. So then we don't feel content. We don't feel okay with what we've already done and where we are right now, because there's more to accomplish.
Yeah. And I mean, I must admit, I think when I think back to those times where we really just kind of bypassed our acknowledgement of where we were, what we accomplished, it's funny how comparison creeps in.
Mm-hmm.
You think
Mm-hmm.
about, people who are accomplishing great things or helping a whole lot of people or whatever it may be, but we never really appreciate, again, to go to your point from before, we never appreciate their journey, what
Mm-hmm.
allowed them to get to where they are.
Mm-hmm.
And how do we just sort of reflect and receive, whether it be the feedback or the support or the acknowledgments or the gratitude of the moment. And I think it's an opportunity really to just really get more centered within ourselves,
Mm-hmm.
really, because these external accomplishments, though they're wonderful, it's not everything about who we are. And yet we often identify ourselves based on our accomplishments.
Mm-hmm. And I do think this past holiday kind of forced us to pause more, which actually allowed more time for reflection. Because often, even in that holiday time, and then when we're transitioning into this new year, we're not really taking that time to reflect, because we're too busy being distracted. And there's just so much noise around all that we're trying to do just in those short few weeks. And we forget that this ritual of trying to invite something new, we really have to look at the old and have reverence for that, and have reverence for maybe even some of the shadow pieces that are kind of still coming with us into this new year, so that we can then create some space to invite what we are now ready for.
Yeah, and this came up. We just finished an amazing mastermind with a group of incredible people on the weekend, and one of the early conversations was really about this metaphor of a cup. And in order to fill your cup up, you have to release that which you've already learned, maybe, or the things, the shadow pieces, or some of these things from your past that you've already, accomplished or are already overcome. And yet we continue to carry it with us and keep reminding ourselves of, maybe the pain that we were in, or like that story, or those, the skill set that we had up until this certain point in time, we just keep taking forward. And so in this topic or discussion of a new year or manifesting for this new year, how do we sort of lighten that load from the past, or sort of empty that cup so we can start to put new things in?
Well, I think that in itself is a process, because we carry so much of our story into the present and then into the future. And I think first is just acknowledging that and recognizing that I don't need to carry this pattern or this old belief or this story that maybe wasn't giving me the gifts that I need, but then recognizing, okay, what did I receive from that, and taking that lens into creating that new future.
Awesome. So here we are, we're in 2022, and we don't always reference our new year based on the new year, but we tend to have our new word of the year anyways at this time of year. We really feel like our new year is your birthday. Really, it's like sort of the refresh button, or but there's an energy around New Year's, and there's Chinese New Year's, there's all sorts of different New Year's going on around the world, and it's just we're choosing collectively in our Western world the New Year's January 1st. And so there's this expectation, there's still an energy of change that's going on. So with that being said, with this discussion of like receiving and all those kinds of things, how do you see yourself showing up in this new year?
Yeah, so I do always think that it's important to have an intention for the year and what you want to create or even release. So my two words are reclaim and declare. So it's reclaiming parts of myself that maybe I disowned or have been ashamed of, or maybe left behind a little bit so that I could get ahead or do the other things, and just kind of reclaiming parts of myself, so then I can declare my true essence and what my truth is and what I want in the world and what my gifts really are. So that's kind of where my focus is going to be this year. And I don't know how that's going to manifest. I don't know what it's going to look like, but I'm just going to continuously have those words in my psyche, so that when I'm making decisions or when things are showing up for me, I can just have those in my mind or ask myself, like, how is this choice going to help me reclaim and declare what it is that I want?
Yeah, I love those words that you chose. And I think it's interesting just in this, concept of the metaphor of this cup too. It's like you're sort of choosing to reclaim that which is going to serve you going forward. It's not that, you never remember maybe things from the past. It's not about like, well, to some degree, I guess it's dissolving your story, or maybe just dissolving the attachment and reclaiming that which maybe the lesson. And so that you can carry that energy of the lesson or the vibration or the feeling, what it feels like to feel that strength from going through that journey, and then, declaring that which maybe you don't yet know. Right?
Yeah.
That's really cool.
And yours?
Yeah. You said intention. That's kind of my word for the year, is just intentional. And
in your communication and everything.
Yeah, we'll get into that, Sonya. We just had a little disagreement before we got on, but anyways, we'll dive into what that's all about in a moment. But what I wanted to say was, I find that sometimes for me that, and I brought this up on the weekend, and maybe some of you listening can relate to this. Sometimes I find that I'm a product of my environment, and so it could be the kids, I'm playing with them and I focus on the kids, and then I sort of lose myself in the experience and sort of shift so that I can be serve them in that experience. Or maybe I'll do that in a group of friends and find that I maybe, because of the people that are there, I sort of shift who I am a little bit to maybe it's because I feel like I'm making other people feel comfortable, or maybe it's putting on a different role. But the idea is that the environment's determining or dictating a bit of like how I'm showing up in that experience. And so, from my own past, my own history, it was common for me to try to play small, be humble, have humility, like all those virtuous things that you think are really important. And in that process, in that journey, you lose a bit of your own self-expression, your own truth, your ability to show up in the way that you want to in those moments. And really, like, that should just be, should, or that could be in those experiences, just you as you are always. Right. And maybe you just turn up or down the energy dial, but you don't necessarily have to change who you are, how you're operating in order for other people to feel comfortable.
Yeah, it's important to know like when that started for ourselves too, because I think this is something that's very common. Like when I think about our youngest son, he's constantly saying how amazing he is and how he's going to win this and he's going to beat somebody on this or he's going to do this. And, like when does that shift for a child that they start to realize that they can't talk about their gifts and express themselves and say how amazing they are. Like, I'm just curious of like, when is it like a look from a parent, or is it that they got shamed from maybe a peer or maybe a teacher? So just kind of reflecting on when that may have shown up that told us that it's not safe to actually express in that way.
Yeah, as you're saying that, I'm kind of thinking back to different moments in my own childhood where, so I think some of it, like there's these little themes, and there's some themes of where like children are meant to be seen, not heard. That was sort of a theme, and it was something that definitely my mom had said, repeated as something that was passed down from generation to generation. Now that I'm saying that, sometimes I realize that we often compare what our childhood was like compared to what our boys, it's kind of like that story of, I had to walk 10 miles in snow to get to school. Like, obviously my parents, I don't think ever shared, that sort of contrast with me in their own life. But there's themes of that where it's kind of like, this is how you were technically supposed to be behaving in this experience, and yet this is how you're showing up. And I think maybe multiple little experiences like that, and then really it's, I think in that moment, especially for kids, they're being misunderstood. Because they're just expressing who they are.
Yeah, I mean, our oldest constantly reminds us of that. Well, this is my experience.
Yeah. He's so good at articulating that.
Very good at articulating.
When he does that to Sonya and I, we're kind of like, we kind of sit back and go, you're right.
Yeah. Yeah.
So so intention. And what's funny? Something that I was just doing, I don't know when it started. Maybe it was January 2nd or 3rd, but I started waking up, and for whatever reason, I started reflecting on gratitude, and that was part of just an experience that started to come out, like gracious to be able to wake up next to this amazing woman, or gracious that I've got 2 boys that are incredible, and I get to teach them and help mold them and support them in their journey, and grateful for patience, grateful for getting to share. And it just, I don't know where it came from, but it was just, I know gratitude practice is super important, but for whatever reason, the last few, or that one morning I woke up doing that, and then I just started to repeat that on a daily basis. So maybe that's part of that intention lesson for me, is to just, it's tied to gratitude. And, it gives us an opportunity to remember what's important. And so to get into our little disagreement beforehand, Sonya and I started to make a bit of a rule on the weekend, and we can be kind of snappy with each other once in a while. And it's usually because, on my end, I'm not being intentional enough with what I'm speaking, or maybe as she pointed out today, I was having a conversation in my head about something, and for whatever reason, she wasn't in my head listening to the dialogue I was having. And so there was miscommunication, right? And so, it was a good example of not being intentional.
Yeah. Well said.
Yeah.
So we invite all of you to maybe just take some moments to reflect on 2021.
We didn't finish the story.
Oh, there was more?
So, well, yeah, because when we're in that disagreement, we made a promise to each other that it can be really a silly thing that we're upset about. It could be, provoking each other because we want to be right, or there was a miscommunication going on, and we want to not take responsibility for it. Whatever it is, we just decided to try to be playful instead, and sort of play our way out of the rut. Because this one has a pretty incredible capacity for stubbornness. It's like a superpower. Really, if I do something wrong, it's like, I'm going to have to do some serious like timeout or whatever until she cools down. And
the great thing is I usually don't have to say a word.
You don't. She doesn't. And me, I'm impatient. I'm like, okay, let's move on. Like, let's get out of this rut. And she's kind of like, well, no, I'm gonna stay here, and I'm fine in my space of peace. And you're not really bothering me right now, but I'm not necessarily gonna talk to you either. And so, anyways, what we got out of this weekend is an opportunity to be playful and just poke each other, and in a more loving, playful kind of way to just unravel the discord, whatever that was, that's stickiness. Because often when miscommunication happens, it's because we're just like focused on different things. Like we're like, she was busy doing something, I came in, I had an agenda, and like I said, she wasn't in my head listening to everything that I was saying, and it's like really frustrating that she can't read my mind sometimes.
Yeah,
right?
I'm working on that. I'm working on that superpower.
Yeah. Anyways, so maybe that's a little lesson.
Yeah, I think that's a whole other podcast that we could do just on that space of communication and intentional communication, and how we can all work on that so that we can have more peaceful relationship within ourselves and everyone around us.
Yeah.
So now,
and that being said, though, one more thing.
Yeah.
It's like, I think all of us are quick to label disagreement as something bad. And so, speaking of the shadow, like releasing the stuff in the cup, all this is super important to just, okay, can I be with this discomfort that I'm feeling right now? And can I get out of the way of my pride to just be silly? And so it's not disagreements, arguments are totally normal and they're not bad. They're just like, what are you going to do with it? It's fuel for something. It doesn't have to be fuel for the atomic bomb going off, right? It can just be fuel for change and transformation. And
yeah, and we've had conversations on the podcast before too, of like understanding each other's rhythms, right? So we did that relationship podcast, and so my rhythm at the moment is the week before my cycle. So
deal with it, buddy.
Yeah.
Is that kind of
but then there can just be a little bit more of an understanding of like, oh, okay, so I just really need to be really intentional with my communication.
So are you suggesting that couples have a calendar up, and then
yes,
and this is week
why
1,
not?
week 2?
Why not?
Well,
yeah.
Why don't we start the journey? Like, we got a calendar right there.
Okay,
we can put a code.
Yeah, so there's homework for everyone. 1, create your intention for the year. 2, get out a calendar so that you know each other's rhythms, so that you can communicate better and start dreaming together. Because I think what happens often is that when you feel stuck, especially as we have as a culture, as a society for the last couple of years, that for me, I'll speak for myself, that it just felt like I couldn't dream anymore. And this past weekend and just the holidays and everything, just kind of shifting my lens around that has helped me feel into that more and understand that dreaming is always possible. Yeah, so more dreaming, more intention, and let's hear your words for the year, or your phrase or your poem or whatever that may be for you. But please share with us on social media. Make sure you guys subscribe to the podcast and send it out. We're going to be bringing on great guests this year, and we have a lot of different things that we want to create and share with all of you. And rate, please. Reviews. Yes. That's going to help us as well.
It's all helpful.
Yeah.
Lots of love, and we'll see you in the next one.